Okay, Mathijs, back at it. Sitting here on the TDF lands and dropping into a serendipitous conversation, seeing what emerges. Would you like to share who I am sitting here with and what that being cares most deeply about in life?
Sure. My name is Mathijs de Bruin. I moved some 7 years ago to the northern tip of Portugal, Paredes de Cora, Silverto, and I'm trying to create rural co-housing there in and with a food forest. So the idea is that I imagine living with a group of amazing people on this beautiful, lush green land where we can actually produce a good chunk of our own food on the land, and we are part of a currently emerging ecosystem there, a local community of people with this sort of weird ecological mindset. I think what I really care about is what I deeply care about is having a graceful future for humanity. So we might not be able to avert extinction or other really strong adverse circumstances, but we can learn to be with each other and with ourselves and with our environment in a stance of respect and respect of mutual dignity.
That's a beautiful thing to care about, I'd say. And I just realized that maybe we can, as you suggested, play with just having that there. And see if that suffices.
Of course.
So the north of Portugal. How long since you moved there? And what brought you there in the first place?
I moved to northern Portugal because there's rain. So the way Portugal is looking is that in basically the previously optimistic scenarios already we would expect anything up to more or less the north of Portugal to become desert lands, or like close enough to desert that no meaningful quantities of food can be produced there, and that was like foreseen around 2050, so it's not like the far future. If you look at a map of Europe from a satellite perspective, you go to Google Maps, you look at the satellites, you see that there are certain places in southern Europe that are green. So in the Iberian Peninsula, this is the Pyrenees, and it's Galicia and the northern part of Portugal. So that was a huge argument. I also really like the landscape, and for personal reasons I opted for southern Europe. I'm from the Netherlands myself. The rain I get in northern Portugal is more or less the same in absolute terms, but then in northern Portugal every now and then I get some sun in between, and also it happens to be that the food I like to eat, tomatoes and peppers and aubergines and a lot of other foodstuffs, like the climate in northern Portugal is tolerant of growing more crops than almost anywhere in Europe.
So a wise selection of place. It was fun. I caught you eating a bell pepper just like from your hand yesterday. It was fun and playful. So you're from the Netherlands, and then you moved down south to the north of Portugal for different reasons. How long is that since now?
I think it's about 7 years ago.
7 years ago.
Yeah, about 7 years. I live there now. The project has its meanders. By now there's a beautiful old house on the land that's mostly restorated, and we're starting to make plans to actually do construction of some tiny houses, maybe temporary structures, but also actual legal permanent structures for up to 3 permanent resident families or households, and then maybe up to 5 intermittent or temporary, let's say, residence type of situations.
So your kind of grand vision for this place, and maybe tie it in with with the relationship to TDF. Want to share a little bit about that?
Well, of course, TDF is a partner project of ours. Like there's a lot of overlap in aspirations between TDF. It's also this rural regeneration, getting people that that try to have a global impact and look at a larger scheme and a larger perspective, and then try to implement it locally while still connecting to this global infrastructure. This idea of instead of like, we're a bunch of hippies hiding away somewhere on our own piece of land, doing a bit of regenerative agriculture, really looking at scales. So we need to have 10, 100 and 1,000 of these projects at the same time, and then looking at the network effects of that, rather than I'm just retreating from the system, is really trying to create pockets of high diversity and weird spaces in the niches on the edge of ecosystems, rather than trying to change the whole system, which is a scale that we can't fathom. We can be that, we can use the edge effects of societies to actually affect structural change, basically provide reserves of alternative culture.
Preserves of alternative cultures.
Yeah.
Curious. It sounds like you have quite comprehensive perspective, both from the kind of larger context that you and we are doing this in, and on what, the larger context, and on what alternative or possible responses can be. But you want to share a little bit about your perspective on the global context and your journey through, I guess, having an increased awareness of that, and all the way to the kind of empowered agency or practice that you are now trying to cultivate.
Sure. I've basically been some form of a political activist throughout most of my life. I never really understood why and how it makes sense that small groups of people and a few large corporations pretend that they lay out how we should all be living, and at the same time that dictated way of living not being such that we can keep on living. So it's like our globally our way of life is a self-terminating situation. And at one point I studied physics, I studied philosophy, then I started, I set up my own cooperative in Amsterdam with some colleagues, just doing software development. And our plan was always to spend part of our time like making the world better. But my colleagues had children and mortgages, and they weren't so risk-minding. And at one point I kind of decided, okay, I'm gonna just leave this whole cooperative. I'm gonna travel around Europe. I'm gonna do research into sustainability. I'm going to do research into deep sustainability, like what does it mean if you actually imagine a future rather than, okay, I'm just going to do some recycling, change my light bulbs and put some solar panels and drive an electric car. I never saw that as a solution. And then I got from there into seeing different places, hacker villages, eco-communities, and at one point I saw a food forest. And that was a few weeks after I saw how most of the vegetables in Europe are produced in Almeria, in a place that's, the size of a small country, where you really see the earth being sucked dry, and the people as well. So then a few weeks later I was staying in this place where we were just literally eating off the land. There was this wild garden, and it didn't look like a garden, but then you just grab some stuff, some leaves, and you grab some more leaves, and you grab some berries, and you grab some nuts. So I saw that happening. I saw an actual food forest, and that kind of turned me on to the idea of agroforestry.
So a little bit of tech and software development and cooperative and sustainability. You mentioned deep sustainability, agroforestry, food forest. I've got the impression that you're somehow trying to integrate all of these things into your work and lifestyle. And curious if you want to share a little bit about that, both how you started putting these things together and how you're now trying to apply it and practice it in Silverto.
Yeah, for me those things were never too separate. I've always, I have a background in the Dutch hacker movement. where at the same time, we use technology, but we're also highly critical of it, and we're very much into ownership of technology through open source. At this moment, for example, I'm also working with AI. I am trying to kick off a startup where we want to use AI and algorithms to accelerate the design and management of food forests. So that's a project I'm very stoked about, and I see a lot of potential. But I do think it's time for these kinds of projects to be seen as financially viable, and it's greatly frustrating that I would have to explain investors that a project that is part of the solution that would help us to survive is something that's harder to finance than something that would actually make poor people poorer or somehow extract value from non-renewable resources, which includes people. So it's difficult, this tension between sort of late state capitalism, which is a death machine at this point, where I'm not excluding market effects, but like capitalism is a particular way of dealing with capital where it's worth more in liquid form. So if I take a mountaintop, I skin the mountain and I grind it to pulp, then it's somehow worth more and I created value, which of course doesn't make sense. And then there's other systems. The only technology we know on the planet for actually sequestering carbon is not carbon capture and storage, it's growing forest. It's the only way that we know how to capture carbon. And I often hear this joke that if trees had Wi-Fi, we'd be planting them everywhere. So that's what I really want to see.
Wi-Fi trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, you remind me of probably a quote by many people, but I tend to hear it from Daniel Schmachtenberger. That a whale is worth more dead on land than alive with all the millions of functions it have in an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Same with a tree. Like it's worth more when you chop it down and turn it into planks and into materials for whatever, rather than staying in an ecosystem with all the literally thousands and potentially millions of ecosystem services it offers to both humans but also the living ecosystem.
I think the ecosystemic is something that I opened up to. I studied physics, and that's like you really look at a narrow system. You first put it in a box, and what I learned in the last years is really it's all about the connections. That's also, for example, Silverto as a project by itself is not very meaningful, but Silverto embedded in a larger ecosystem regionally, where I really imagine 3 or 4 or maybe 5 communities similar to what I'm building in my own region within 5 to 10 years, but also, for example, in Portugal. Portugal is one of the hotbeds of Europe for these kind of movements with TDF and a few other places, the garden, there's a few other places nearby and a bit further away. So really looking at things like we're looking at the diversity in people. It's great to know how to build stuff, but you also need people that know how to connect people. You need people that dream. You need people that reflect creatively. There's all these different roles, and the same goes for natural systems. This is why agriculture is a bit like it's a problematic situation, because you're really growing only one thing. If there's a plague, if there's a pest, if there's unlikely events that are now becoming more likely, like droughts or very strong rains, sudden cold, sudden heat. If you have mixed systems and diverse systems, they're way more resilient to that. And it's even for culture. So if you have one community that is like, we're communists, and you have another community that's like, we're just downright Nazis. And then you have other communities that are somewhere in the middle, or you have communities that are based purely on collective, and there's communities based more on like, I just have my own house and then I just take care of myself. If you have that mixture, that landscape, and you allow for exchange, where people are not fully expected to let go of what's their own thing. This is actually the only way I see for humanity to harbor the cultural resilience that we need to stand a chance to adapt and work with all the severe challenges we're facing.
Mm. So some of what I'm hearing and yeah, kind of extracting from what you're saying, like one of the themes was like scaling, not just looking at like the one little project,
Yeah,
the permaculture project over here or the village over here, but actually scaling it to the regional and then to the maybe bioregional and then to the global level. So regenerative scaling is a theme I want to pick up on. And then, yeah, I hear a lot of systems thinking here and resilience thinking. Say how, yeah, instead of just looking at the isolated parts, we need to look at the systemic dynamics, relationships, and effects. And then the last one, you mentioned diversity and exchange and how, both ecological and social diversity is key to be able to withstand the increasing shocks and disturbances and disruptions to the systems. So yeah, do you want to elaborate a little bit on your perspective on how we can scale the necessary change, like regenerative scaling?
Yeah, I think society at large is not ready to change, and I think I'm increasingly suspecting, and it's kind of tragic, that society at large, so let's say the bulk of the population, would rather die than change. And I'm quite bitter about this. It takes a lot of work to allow yourself to actually go there and like open up to that being a possibility. People rather die than fight somehow, or rather die than open up to what seems to be unsafety. Like the concept of safety is like a kind of a modern invention, and it's not something that humans have traditionally had. A lot of native cultures don't even have the concept of safety.
Can I ask safety or security or certainty? I tend to like hear this being a bit mixed up.
I think neither. Maybe security in an emotional sense is something that like we have less in our modern cultures than some of the other things. So basically, what I imagine more, if you have an ecosystem has niches. So if you have a little hill, then on the side of the hill, where the hill turns into the plain, you will have much more diversity. If you have a little stream of water, then around the stream of the water, that's where you have the diversity. If you go from a place where there's trees to a place that's more grassy, on the edge you have diversity. So these are called edge effects in biology. And I think the role of the kind of projects we're doing are strengthening these edge effects. So we do this by literally having edges, so having on the edge of society, having these weird places where we allow for novelty, we allow for strangeness, we allow explicitly for diversity and divergence from the norm. And on top of that, we also do this ecologically. So in a place like this, there's a food forest just there, where you plant a lot of species that wouldn't naturally occur together, and you create these systems that are wildly diverse in comparison to natural systems. And you have different successions growing at the same time. You have different types of plants with different roles, different ecological roles. Then you do a lot of like observation and feedback. But if there's like some disturbance in the climate or some disturbance in the environment, you'll see that those systems that are artificially or naturally set up to be way more diverse, that is where the reserve comes from for actually coping on a larger scale with these things. So if you have a regenerative project, and we have our own money, we have a bit of an internal market going on. Let's say we have a cooperative with some local producers, some local buyers. We have our own system of exchange, and suddenly there's a huge economic shock. Then these kind of systems, they're much more resilient. So for example, in northern Spain, there's this town called Mondragon, where they organize the entire town in terms of cooperatives, like almost everything, including the banks and the schools and the hospitals and the factories, they're all cooperative. And they were much more resilient in the recent economic crisis. So I see that this is really a potential. If we organize in ways that are more resilient, then this model will copy. So the moment this happened, people went to Mondragon and they started studying and how can we replicate, how can we learn from this? So these are cultural bases, these are cultural reserves where we do weird stuff. It's okay if 90% of this stuff fails or doesn't work or works different from the way we expect it, but we can learn from these, we can learn from the failures, we can learn from the successes. And in the face of crisis, when the crisis occurs, we should hope to be better off. And that's good for us, but it's also good for the people around us that can then learn from us.
Some things coming to mind is like that we go through both ecological systems and the earth system, and even in our personal lives and in society, we go through, you know, phases and periods of stability, and then phases of turbulence. And say during phases of stability, you have like a dominant system and a dominant way of doing things that is kind of optimized for this specific type of stability. But then suddenly you have a disruption or a shock or like a massive change to the system, either from within or from without. That is where the mainstream is not kind of optimized for and becomes fragile. And then it's nice to have these diverse little pockets of weirdness or of diversity that can then suddenly become adaptive in that state and then be kind of scaled to adapt to the new period or the new phase.
Yeah, I honestly believe that the new phase, as in like looking towards a new long-term metastable situation, I don't think it's realistic to even think about that. I don't think we should be wanting, like what we can realistically expect is that we will never have stability within the course of our lifetimes and maybe the next 5 to 7 generations coming. It's just not only does any sort of action in the face of climate change last about 30 years to be effective. So like before, like, you know, we change our light bulbs and it takes 30 years for it to have any effect. But also it seems that a lot of runaway climate change is already in effect. And the same for ecosystem collapse. So we're really facing basically, and it freaks me the hell out, but every time there's news regarding climate change or the status of ecosystems or even the resources, we're really facing a structural situation of being on a rough sea. So our past climate has been like more or less in this range. If you look at temperatures, it's been like within a very narrow range that is historically unique for the specific period in which cities were built, civilization existed, and humans were around. And now we're looking at this. So we're really going out of these types of limits. So we need to get really good at surfing, and we need to be emotionally resilient to that. And the moment we start to we put energy into trying to remain stable, that's where we lose, because we can't afford it. We can't afford we need to basically survive with or deal with all these things continuously collapsing and somehow manage to be spiritually and emotionally and also to some extent materially well with it.
Yeah, so what I'm seeing is kind of a little phase shift in the conversation, representing the phase shift of the world. Like we're talking a little bit more about kind of local projects like Silverto and TDF, and now transitioning a bit more over to the global context and like deep history of like phases and stability and instability throughout the history of the Earth. And what I heard was that you mentioned that we have recently been in quite a stable period with small fluctuations in, say, climate and environment around a kind of a stable baseline, that we're now heading into much more turbulence and much wider ranges of states of the system, and that in order to face that and survive and hopefully thrive, we need to become more like personally, emotionally, spiritually resilient, and probably also like socially and community-wise resilient, and all the way up to the societal systems and the ecological environmental systems. yeah, so just zooming out and seeing like the transition in the conversation from the more local to the global, and then the transition that we're facing, which was a topic that I really wanted to bring up with you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of your perspectives on the again the global situation and the period that we're now entering,
Yeah.
and maybe bringing in both the ecological situation, you know, climate, environment, regeneration, etc., and the social dimension, and the technological dimension.
Yeah.
Would you be able to kind of bake this together into
Do something with that,
yeah,
right?
do something with that, a little ramble.
Yeah. So I think it's good to explain a little bit about metastable behavior, or like, you know, we often talk, a lot of people like to idealize nature as a stable system, which is bollocks. Nature doesn't do stability. Nature at best does what's called metastability. So if you have a complex system where every element has effect on any other element, and most of these effects are what's called nonlinear, which means that if you change something by a factor 2, the outcome will be significantly more or significantly less than factor 2. So, you know, if I pour water into a bowl twice as fast, then the amount of water will double and the amount in the same time. But if you have a nonlinear system, if I start pouring something twice as fast, then the amount of water in a bowl goes like 10 times as fast, or there's only a tiny bit because somehow the bowl behaves different. So nature is full of those kind of systems, and in nature, by nature I mean just any system complex enough to have a rich dynamic that you would see around you. So really point at any system that you can look at around you that is not that's smarter than the thermostat in your house, and you'll see these kind of behaviors. And
even systems within you.
Systems win especially. So what you see is that these systems, they have these points of convergence. They're called complex attractors. So these are situations where a system tends to be around a certain value for some reason that we can't really explain. There are particular climate systems that are taking warmth from the Amazon to here, the Iberian Peninsula, and also basically all of Europe. That is preventing an ice age. So there's a lot of these balances. They're in there for no reason. Cause and effect doesn't apply so much, and it just happens to linger around there, but there's no guarantee that it'll keep lingering around. And basically, if you disturb the system far enough at one point, these metastable balances, this also goes for the balances between species and ecosystems, they will collapse, which means that you get chaotic or unorderly behavior, erratic behavior, where basically anything can happen for no reason and it will be completely unpredictable. So those are the kinds of, like, the climate, in terms of ecology, in terms of being able to access food for humanity, in terms of literally not dying from pure heat, as we're gonna see, well, we've started to see in the past year, and we're going to see increasingly. So there's the natural disasters, all these kinds of things. It's really a smorgasbord. Probably don't pronounce that right, but it's a smorgasbord of challenges. And in that sense, like, maybe thriving is not like we probably should redefine thriving. I think that could be interesting. And then also we can see is like, okay, what kind of ways we can deal with that. And one of the things is we need to get better at communicating. We need to not create so much drama about relatively minor things, even though, like, we're cultured in the West, we're full of drama. That a lot of people in the rest of the world, they would be like, it's what are you complaining about? You still have food and a roof and safety. So there's these kind of things, but also we can use communication tools. We can use large language models to translate between us, to learn us to communicate more empathically, or to really find the people that we need, or the knowledge that we need to solve particular critical problems that we have. And similarly, if we actually start looking at, okay, how do we navigate this planet and ecosystems and all this complexity? There's increasingly more complexity. In complex systems, it's not that if you just change one button, you know what the effect is going to be. So you need to fiddle with millions, hundreds of millions of different variables that you can have a limited amount of control and you don't know exactly what the outcome will be. Humans, we're not able at dealing with complexity. We're not able to. Our minds can look ahead every time we project the future, even as we sit here and we hope that we train ourselves in systems thinking and looking at, we have no idea. And our projections towards the future are about futures that are a minor variant of the present. You see this very much in science fiction, where you can, like, the age in which science fiction is written says more about the science fiction than the actual future that the science fiction is about. So we need to be aware of these things, and I personally open up very much to things like open source AI, where we can actually use systems specifically trained, not like large language models right now. They're not so good at complexity and they're mostly seem to be reflecting whatever they train on, but we can really design AI systems to deal with sort of steering or navigating or serving sort of this continuous kaleidoscope that will be our future. So that's something I'm mildly optimistic about.
So if I am to try to grab what you wove together from these threads that we initiated, complex dynamical systems and complex systems dynamics, where you have systems like ecosystems or body systems or social systems or climate systems, with a lot of different variables, a lot of different interactions, very non-linear, very unpredictable in that sense, and we need to learn how to maybe dance with that complexity rather than try to steer and manage and control it. So some of what I caught there, and then you mentioned towards the end AI systems and prediction, and that they tend to predict just a small little change in whatever we have seen so far, instead of the radically, completely different future that
Not only humans.
Humans, okay.
We are almost completely unable to imagine
Something we haven't seen.
realistically imagine something that we that's radically different from now. We always deal with stuff we haven't seen, but those are more like archetypes. It's like if we even if you take some psychedelics or you go into a deep meditative trance.
Why would you ever do that?
People tend to see more or less the same things, you know. If you look at past life regression, a surprising number of people used to be Napoleon. So there are real there are really a lot of black spots. For example, in climate activism, most climate activists they don't open up. It's starting now, but particularly traditionally they didn't open up to the perspective that, like, okay, well, it's like maybe we're not gonna actually battle and win, and maybe that's not realistic. Maybe the concept of solving the problem the way an engineer would solve an equation is not something that's feasible. So we need to get rid of problem solution thinking. I think it's a dangerous. I'm not against all hope, but I think it's a dangerous thing to put your hope on. We're just going to solve this. I don't think we're going to solve this within human timescales. We're really looking at geological time that is really not relevant for humans at this point.
I hear a lot of new interesting threads of the conversation opening up here, like our worldviews, our mental models, and how they may or may not be so adapted to navigate the future, as they're very much based on what we've seen in the past, and not just in the past, but in our short little lifetime.
Yeah.
And these archetypical patterns of our minds. Psychedelics, meditation. It's a lot of juicy stuff to get into here. But maybe we can loop it a little bit back to the present and into this place and into what we have been doing here the past couple of days and weeks. A thread that came up to me as important was imagination and play in that context.
Yeah.
As we're facing turbulent times with a lot of uncertainty about what the book it's going to bring, we need imagination. And play can be an activator of imagination and trying to do things differently, both yeah, our minds and mental models and worldviews, but also our social dynamics and even how we manage our environments and how we play with technology. Um, Anyways, I'm on a little bit of a ramble, but I'm curious if you want to share a little bit about your experience here at, I guess, first Gathering of Tribes and then at TDF. Like, what was some specific or generic experiences, insights, yeah, lessons that have landed for you?
I think I find it always very nice to be in a place like TDF and also the gathering of tribes in the garden because of the social dynamics of the community dynamics. You know, it's really a very comforting feeling that I have a group of people around me that when I kind of lose my shit, I know that they can like bring me back to earth and just be like, oh man, you're just overreacting, which, you know, most of the time when we react, we are overreacting.
Or they can take your shit and compost it and grow a nice little fruit tree
Compost
from
it, yeah. And I like this idea of taking care of each other and being taken care of, like there being food or being part of food or stepping in when there's a problem or where somebody else needs, or this idea that you can just be in a natural giving mode. I was thinking about it yesterday. That
giving mode.
yeah, I was thinking about that it's really nice to be able to, and I had that before at TDF as well, that I'm able to do what I naturally do really well, which is like focus and get stuff done. I figured out I'm a builder. That's my type, let's say. So I need to be surrounded by also some people who are not builders and that are happy to support processes. And to sort of make sure that people that really like to do deep focus, they can do deep focus. And this is something I think I like a lot about the vibe that TDF brings. Somehow there's a very
I want to just
healthy...
pull the attention towards the ant right there that was carrying a little leaf and doing its role in the ecosystem or the superorganism of
I
ants.
already had an animal on my back which stung me a minute ago. No, but it's I really like this social dynamic and this comfort in a group, and like a lot of it fascinates me. I'd like to have a similar energy in my own place, but it's really a matter of attracting people with the right kind of mental health. I'm sure, I'm actually, it's a fact that there's drama everywhere all the time and everybody brings baggage, and some people, they literally lose their shit, and the cost of that on a community project is high. I had that in my own project as well. And this is something that maybe it could actually be an interesting way to take the conversation, is how do you deal with toxic elements in community processes in a way that at the same time you don't allow sort of outside interference to crash your community dynamics, but at the same time you don't fully close down towards the outside world and you be like, no, this is us, you're not welcome here. So you want to have a certain amount of openness. You want to have a certain amount of openness, but you also don't want to be fully open, because you need to have a certain barrier on one side to allow for evolution to work. You need to have a certain limit to the amount of exchange you have with your environment, and on the other side to make sure that your local metastable, fragile balance you have with, you know, people that are able to improve the balance and the stability of the community. Like if you have a community that's comprised of mostly or almost exclusively people that are able to give, they're able to give just a tiny bit more than what they take, I find things go well.
Virtuous cycles.
Yeah. And learning to discriminate between people that pretend to give, that like it seems to give, you look at it and you think about it rationally, you say, yeah, this person is giving. But then actually when you reflect on it, it's like every time I'm around this person, I feel tired, I feel drained.
Yeah, you feel it, you can't put
You
your
feel
finger
it,
on it,
you
but
feel
you
it.
feel it.
But you're not going to kick people out just because of a feeling sometimes. So it's very challenging.
Justified at least.
I mean, there's a huge mental health crisis developing in the world, and places like these that are on the margin, they attract a disproportionate amount of people that are affected by this. And of course, most people have some psychological processes going on, some growing pains, myself included. But the trick is really like how to be a person that, despite the issues that you're dealing with on a personal level, you can still contribute and give. How to be this person, and another level, like how to surround yourself with people that are in this place. That it doesn't matter, you can be depressed, you can be frothing with anger, and still have a positive effect on those around you.
I love where you where you took the conversation, because like this topic is also so critical and so important. Like how do you manage the complex social dynamics in a community, and how do you find the balance between again openness and inclusivity and diversity, but also some kind of not closeness but stability and structure and resilience.
Rhythm.
So how do you balance these things? How do you find a healthy balance between also including neurodiversity and including people with mental health issues, which I would maybe assume that most of us somehow have, in the sense that most of us have some kind of trauma throughout our lives, and most of us also have some kind of input about what's going on in the world, which is quite traumatizing. Like if you open your eyes and actually connect to what is happening in the world, you should to some extent feel overwhelmed, frustrated, angry, despair, uncomfortable. But how do you find the balance between, again, the inclusivity and the resilience and the openness and closeness? Anyways, open question, worth exploring. How do you, I also noticed you mentioned or brought up the topic of how do you discern between what is authentic and what is more
Performative,
yes.
I think this is a very interesting part.
Real virtue and virtue
You see it a lot in things like eco-villages, where people proclaim they're a shaman or something like that. And I'm personally highly suspicious of that. I'm not. I consider myself a highly spiritual person, but for me, there's an element of the sacred there. And for example, just taking some elements from arbitrary native cultures and then mixing them together and doing a mishmash. But there's probably ways to do that in ways that, from those native perspectives, might be considered respectful. But there's also a lot of ways to do that in ways that, in ways that might seem hypocritical. Because on one side you're pretending to be all loving and caring, but on another side you are in a situation like we are in Europe. We are in a rich part of the world. Our wealth and perhaps a chunk of our well-being is directly derived of the exploitation and suppression of other peoples and their cultures and their land base. So we need to be aware of that and have a tonfuck of modesty towards other cultures. And I think like really opening up to the sacred means really like modesty. It means that you tread with the ways of a guest in the ecosystems and the communities you visit, and you open up to like, I'm very young. I'm not technically that young anymore for a human, but I feel very young in the sense that I come to places and it's like, what can I learn here? What can other people share with me and give to me? And it's not all places. If I go to a random city here in Portugal, I don't always feel inspired by the diversity and the richness, or let's say a random group of people. But then I seek out people that I really can learn from and I really can grow from. And I have the same as like if I walk through my own forest, every time I spend most of my time observing, really opening up, seeing how my forest behaves, how the trees behave, how the plants and the insects and the other animals, the birds, how they behave, how they interact. I think there's a lot of performance happening, especially like we're here contributing probably to social media or sort of this spinning of a narrative. In an attention economy, these type of toxic behaviors where you put yourself in the center, there's a very strong drive for this. You get access to money and revenue streams. You get attention. You get positive feedback. You get sexual partners. So there are strong pressures, and to a large extent, the whole regenerative world attracts this sort of behavior because there is a lot of how do you say it? Like a lot of strategies that we like to employ towards being regenerative, and a lot of strategies, like a lot of eco-villages, they're not about let's live in a way that everybody on the planet could live and keep living. A lot of them are about a bunch of rich people from rich countries moving to a poorer country to stay on a higher level of wealth and then just be very smug because we have a bunch of solar panels on our land. So there is a lot of toxic inauthenticity going on in regen, and there's a lot of incentive for people to not speak the actual painful truth that it's like we're probably not gonna arrive at sort of a stable, happy, good for all future. We need to actually make some of the toughest choices that we can have to make as humans, and accept maybe a certain amount of inequality. Just accept it before we even deal with it. Just be aware that you're a guest in a different culture in a lot of cases, and that we're extremely privileged the moment we probably when you're watching this movie you can safely assume that you're extremely privileged, and that your image of regeneration, that is some variant of the kind of material wealth that you've lived in your life up till now, is not a realistic projection towards the future.
Mathijs, you're opening up so many interesting threads that we can go down. I really appreciate, all the perspectives, both zoomed in and the zoomed out. And I hear the horn blowing in the background, which means there is very soon lunch. And I may have a few questions to drop towards the end, but just to recap some of the threads you opened up here, like authenticity as opposed to performance, openness to the outside and to diversity as opposed to closeness and stability. Zooming out and seeing that a lot of us in the regen movement are quite privileged and in a very unique position in the world to be able to try out these kind of things. I guess this may have been from earlier in the conversation, like looking at the different blind spots of communities and the region movement, and the both individual and collective shadows that we have to work on. So super important and been a highly relevant topic here. And I also heard, or for me, that the balance between, you mentioned the sacred, and this is a continuous topic both for me and in this community, like how can we integrate science and spirituality, rationality and intuition, cultivate a relationship to the sacred. It doesn't need to be supernatural, but how do we actually hold something sacred and stay true to it, both individually and collectively?
I'd like to go into that maybe a bit. But,
want to share some perspectives?
Well, one thing that we don't fully realize is that scientific knowledge is one form of knowledge. And it's one form of knowledge that's about the stuff that you could do research into, and you can gather information on a statistical basis. So a lot of to do statistics on something, you need to gather a number of data points. You can't do statistics if something only occurs once.
Or
right?
something
So
like science is like the domain of what is measurable and repeatable.
more or less, yes.
Like very
So
simplified, and there's a lot of
fairly
things.
simplified, but that's roughly so. And I say this as a scientist, like this, like most things that happen are things that happen just once.
Not
Right?
repeatable.
It's like that. Like if you actually look at statistics, like yes, of course. Like if you look at a bell curve, you know, it goes more or less like this. This is the most likely event. These are quite unlikely events. But it turns out that actually, if you have complex systems with all these complex interactions, that the kind of events that move a system from one metastable pattern, like one way of behaving, towards another way of behaving, are actually those rare events. So they're called what are called long-tail events. So events with a very low probability. These events occur, and they often determine the behavior of systems. So that basically means that actually the things that matter most in a lot of ways are the things over which science has very little or almost nothing to say.
So not the average, not the normal, not the things that tends to repeat
Yeah.
themselves, but rather the outliers, the black swans, the fat tail.
Yeah. Yeah,
Things.
so you get this. It's a very different perspective the moment you go towards complex systems theory, and you have to accept that most systems are not closed boxes. Most interactions are quite strong. You can't just reduce a system to a bunch of little simple elements and then from there on build up. This is not always possible. So yes, sometimes you get emergence, but there's also a bit more going on when you have openness, and in open systems you get different kinds of thermodynamics. So you really get fundamentally different behavior, where suddenly nature and reality is a lot more rich, and where being a person of science doesn't exclude a profound sense of wonder and humility in the face of whatever's around us. For me, there's no antagonism here.
Thank you for sharing that. Resonates a lot, and I feel like it's so critical to get that out there, that it's not this versus this, or you either have to be a rational scientist or you need to be a spiritual wooer.
Yeah.
But you can actually, like, reality includes but transcends both of these perspectives. You have both the objective and the subjective, the measurable and repeatable, and the non-measurable and non-repeatable. And if you want a comprehensive, holistic view on reality or relationship with reality, you need to hold these together, apply different ways of knowing and different ways of being, and be both open to new perspective and information, but also critical. So like the balance between openness and critical.
Yet at the same time, if you walk into a concrete wall, you can safely assume you'll end up with a very strong headache, rather than hitting that extremely unlikely case where you magically quantum tunnel through the wall.
Yeah.
And this is something where I think it's something that I really want people to be aware of this, and also I'm a little bit allergic to this type of magical thinking, where it's like if magic exists, which it might. This is about edge effects. It's about like very, 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 very small influences. There are, if it exists, there's rules about it. There's certain things that work, and there's certain things that don't work. And if your worldview is based on, if I just believe it strongly enough, I can walk through this concrete wall. I can do things that
Fly.
We've seen again and again and again millions of times that gravity holds, and then okay, but I'm not now going to assume that I'm going to fly. You know, I don't think you're helping yourself, and I don't think you're helping the world, unless you can actually show me that you can fly. You know, it's like, yeah, it's like if you actually levitate, even if it's just the tiniest millimeter, but if you actually manage to levitate, you can convince me. But this is a risk. It's a risk to do this type of magical thinking, because you put a lot of energy into wishful thinking. You make assumptions about what your future is going to be, but your future is actually not going to be like that. And then this is also one of the things, together with this sort of performative aspect, and sometimes they seem to be going together, where some belief systems are really not conducive to set a strategy for action towards the future. And it doesn't mean that if I change my beliefs about the world, I can't actually have a measurable impact. It doesn't mean that like if I meditate, it has a huge impact on the way you interact with people, and in the way you see the world, the way you see problems or solutions, or the way you dance with reality. It has huge impact. So that doesn't mean don't do spiritual work. It's just that the fact that you have these other types of knowing doesn't negate the things that science tells us. So I do have some beef with anti-science. But then again, there's also a lot of scientists that say that if it's not proven scientifically, it doesn't exist, and this is just wrong. This is also an erratic way of thinking, and very often this anti-scientism is a reaction to that.
So yeah.
What do you think? We grab some lunch?
Yeah, say we grab some lunch, maybe go and regenerate the land. I really have to do a bio break, so that goes well together. But yeah, I like where we ended up with. At least what came to me was finding a balance between this and this, not seeing them as antagonistic or opposing, but okay, how can they complement each other, be woven together? And yeah, there are certain constraints and patterns and laws of the universe, but there is also a lot of openness for emergence and novelty and creativity.
Yeah.
And we can play an active role in that through our imagination, our agency, our consciousness.
Co-creators of reality.
Yeah, we can actually participate in creating reality, both the interior experienced reality and the exterior observable reality. So maybe we should end it there.
Thank you so much. It's a nice conversation.
Likewise.
And I hope to inspire some people, maybe.
Yeah, maybe even. But yeah, I would love to go down a few of these specific threads at some later point.
Not sure if we get to it, but
X-risk in AI, science and spirituality.
If not now, maybe later.
Regeneration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it was somehow recorded. Otherwise, the universe had other desires. So I think that's the...
Yeah, there you go.